Hello everyone. So in this lecture we're going to talk about muscle fascicle shapes. Now, what's a fascicle? If you need some review, so the muscular system, but when we think muscles, what do we think of? We think of muscles like this. But the thing is that your muscle or muscular system is made of individual muscles. And when you see muscles like these are skeletal muscles, the ones that attach to our skeleton, and they also produce movement. But your skeletal muscles are made up of individual bundles called fascicles. So yeah, multiple muscle could have multiple fascicles, and these fascicles, what are they? Well, these are bundles of muscle fibers or myocytes or myofibers. So muscle fascicles are bundles of muscle cells, or I should say skeletal muscle cells. And inside your skeletal muscle cells, you have these muscle fiber, aka muscle fibers. You have myofibrils. Now, myofibrils are subcellular, meaning they're smaller than cellular structures, and these are made of alternating thick and thin filaments and proteins like actin and myosin. So what your skeletal muscle is pretty much like bundles and bundles and bundles. But if we're talking about fascicles, so again, fascicles are groups of these muscle cells or muscle fibers. All right, so there's different ways that they can be arranged relative to each other. So that's why the muscles have these kind of like striated, this kind of striped look, because all of these are fascicles and all these muscle cells somehow arranged to contract in a certain direction. Now, circular muscles are the easiest because they're circular. And remember that when a muscle cell contracts, what happens? Well, those myofilaments, I should say myofibers and myofibrils, but what they're going to do is they're going to contract and shorten. So when you shorten a circular muscle, think of it this way, like you start off with a circle like this, but what happens when you make the diameter smaller? So, and shorter, it starts to contract like this. So circular muscles, when you contract them, they become smaller in their overall diameter, as you can see here. When they relax, they open up and become bigger. Classic examples are your orbicularis oris. So this is a circular muscle that surrounds your mouth right here. And also your orbicularis oculi. So you have circular muscles around each of your eyes over here. And there's also muscles called sphincters. Now, the orbicularis oculi is an example of sphincter. It's a circular muscle, and this is one way your body can open up something like a passage, or it can close it. So if you want to close your eyes, you're going to contract your orbicularis oculi, but if you are among other muscles, and if you want to open up a passage, you are going to relax it. Or even you also have a lot of sphincters inside your digestive tract, but more on that next semester. All right, so parallel muscles. So back to ninth grade geometry. So what does parallel mean? Well, if you have like two lines or rays or something, like two straight things, if they're like this and they go into the and they never cross, those are parallel. So in terms of like parallel muscles, we have like the fusiform and we have like the bicep brachii, and you also have other types called non-fusiform parallel, and these include your ab muscles, the rectus abdominis, and the sartorius, which wraps across the front of your leg anterior over here. Now, parallel voice crack. Parallel, so what happens is, like, if you look at the middle of the biceps brachii, the bulging part with the belly, is that all the fascicles right here, they're just stacked right next to each other. They're not crossing in like this. They're all kind of arranged parallel. And same with the rectus abdominis, and same with the sartorius muscles over here. Even though it's at the slant, if you're looking at the individual fascicles and muscle fibers, they're all kind of stacked side by side without crossing. Now, what's the difference between fusiform and non-fusiform? Well, the biceps brachii, notice as it's going toward these tendons and the origin and insertion over here, that they start coming back together again. So that's why it's fusiform, because they're fusing together at a point at the end. But if we're looking at the overall swelling and the mass of it, it's mostly parallel. It just happens to taper to a point at these ends over here. But these non-fusiform ones, notice that they don't really have this like fused together like the biceps brachii and the sartorius over here. They still remain pretty broad at this point right here. Now, pinnate muscles. So pinnate refers to, like, think of like or if you've seen those old historical like pictures or what, like museums where they have a pen and it's like it has a little feather quill. I like to think of them kind of like that. So pinnate muscles, here's the extensor digitorum, which helps in like moving like straightening out your fingers right here. So this is a tendon right here that pulls, and this is what I'm showing by blue is the overall direction that it pulls. But notice that in this case, like these would pull along the same in the parallel muscles. They pull in the direction that's also how their fascicles are arranged. But in pinnate muscles, this is how it pull overall. But in this case, we have the individual fascicles and myofibrils, myofibers. They are pulling kind of like a slant to it, so they'll contribute to it overall, but they're not quite parallel. This is a unipinnate muscle and a bipinnate. So notice that here we have like the rectus femoris, which you would find at the anterior, the front of your leg, and it would pull this direction. But if you look at the fascicles, notice that these fascicles are not quite parallel to the overall direction that would pull. So it's kind of like here, or if you've ever seen like those movies where you have a whole bunch like crew or like tug of war, like if you've seen like was it Squid Game, notice that they're not all at the same side, and of them they're kind of like pulling on the sides, but they still pull in the overall direction, but you have them stacked on either side. So that's like a bipinnate muscle. And then multipinnate, well, if you uni means one, bi means two, and sometimes you might have multiple directions. It's pulling in the overall direction, same direction, but like we just don't have two here. We have more than two. So the deltoid is a classic example of that. Okay, and another type you can arrange fascicles is what is called a convergent muscle, and the pectoralis major is a classic example of convergent muscle. So you can think of them like they're fan shaped. So the pectoralis major, the origin is here. The base of the muscle is right here in the center of the chest, and again, you have two pec muscles. The part where it's at the sternum and part of the clavicle over here, this would be the base of the muscle. Now, the tendon all comes to a point over here. So it actually starts out broad and then comes down here to a tendon. So that's why this big broad muscle, when you flex it and do a push-up or a bench press, how it pulls your shoulders forward, because all these muscles, like now it's going to pull it this way, and it's also, but notice that it fans out like that. So not some are parallel, but you have a broad base coming to a single point like here. So you can think of convergent muscles like a convergent fascicle arrangement, kind of like a fan. So those were the basics of these fascicle arrangements. Not all of them are straight, like flat muscles like you see and all over your body. Some do have those special arrangements. But basically, how do you know a fascicle shape? Well, what's the overall shape, and how does it pull? How are these fascicles, these fibers, arranged relative to the overall movement of a muscle?